Stephen Meade again, back with another BullsEye podcast. I could not be more excited. I opportunity to interview Scott Page. You guys will find out why, and then you also find out I'm always excited for the BullsEye over my shoulder, but what he has over his shoulder, even more exciting. And as we get into Scott's story, I'm going to share with him one of mine that hopefully he'll find humorous. But Scott, love you taking the time. Appreciate it, buddy. Just give us a quick little introduction, but don't give us too much yet.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me on the show, Stephen. And then, we've been friends for a long time, right? We've known each other for quite a while back, metal brothers and all that. Yeah. So my background is I came out, I grew up in a musical family. I grew up on a television show called The Lawrence Welk Show. If anybody remembers back in that, my dad was on that show for 14 years. Grew up, studied being an architect, but really got into music. And back when I got into college, when I got in a band with the guys, Jeff Porcaro and David Page in the early days, which became Toto later on, but it was a kid band called Merciful Soul. Kind of went through that. First bands with Seals and Croft, and I worked with, and then with Supertramp, then Toto, and then finally ended up playing with Pink Floyd. And I've been kind of a serial entrepreneur after my dad, because when I was a kid growing up, we had boat businesses, lighting businesses, candy businesses. My dad started the very first amplified instruments and was one of the inventors of the wah-wah pedal. So that's how back. And then we owned a studio called Sound City later on. So I've been around the entrepreneurial space, then got into the technology side of space. And one of my favorite, things that I'm so proud of is I co-produced and co-directed the world's first interactive cartoons called Toonland back on 386, 25 megahertz machines. And since then, I've been doing companies. I'm on my 4th company right now. I was lucky I got to take one of them public, 7th level, which we had a really nice run on. And that's where we did all this interactive stuff and did the whole Monty Python series and the Little Howie series starring Howie Mandel. So my career has really been around a combination of entertainment and technology. And that's kind of where I've lived. And the rest of my career from that point has been kind of mashing those things together.
Good. So you gave us a couple of the Easter eggs and giveaways in there, which is fabulous. Let's go back to the early days. When did you know? It sounds like you grew up in a creative family. So did you know you were creative early on? And then when did you discover the music side?
Well, it's interesting. I was a trumpet player first when I was a kid. And I kind of only did that because my dad kind of wanted me to play music. And it's funny because he was a woodwind player like I am now, but it started out. So I played trumpet through those days, but I was really studying design and I was really into, architecture, and I wanted to become an architect. And through those years, I was a draftsman. I was studying drafting and all those things. And then I got in this band, as the worst trumpet player with Jeff Porcaro and David Page. It was called Merciful Soul Band. And all of a sudden we started winning all the battle of the bands. And I was the worst guy in the band. It was a horn band, kind of like, I'd say Blood, Sweat and Tears, Chicago time frame kind of period. And all of a sudden, I had a job. I was working for a company called Audiodyne as a draftsman, drawing exploded views of parts. And those were days before we had computers. Remember, we had a real pencil, a pen, and you had to.
That's what I was going to ask. How old were you at this time?
Well, I was at that time, I was probably about 17 years old. I guess 17. I got my first job at about 17 doing that for this company.
Great.
And I'd sit there and drink coffee all day. And I got in this band with these kids. And all of a sudden, we're winning all the battles of the bands. And then I had a massive observation happen. There's a lot of girls at those gigs, and there was no girls at my drafting gig. So I said, you know what? I think I like this music business a little bit better. So I ended up deciding I'm going to become a musician, and I completely flipped everything around. I wasn't that good. I couldn't really go out and get any jobs. So I took my drafting skills, and like my father always said, if you're going to be in a business, try to be around the business, if that's what you're going to do, even if you can't be in it. So that's where you can meet people, learn about the business. So I ended up becoming a music copyist. And in those days, again, we had no computers. Now everything's done on computers. But in those days, the composer would, finish the score. He'd call me up at 2 o'clock in the morning and go over and pick up the scores. And I'd stay up all night and I'd write out the first trumpet part, the second trumpet part, the bass player, all the parts. And so that's how I kind of made my living as I was going through college, was being as a draftsman while I was studying. And then I just became full-fledged. I mean, I was, 724, man, I was a music guy. I was studying music, some of the best teachers in the world. And I just practiced all day long. And, I was working 5-6 nights a week in clubs, sometimes 7 days a week. And I just became a musician. And, luckily I fell into some great things as I was going. And my first real band I took off was Seals and Crofts. That was my first real touring band. I mean, I did other things beforehand, but yeah, and that just led to more and more as I started moving forward.
And so your first instrument was trumpet, but then you eventually moved to saxophone.
Yeah, I got in a band. I actually got a gig with a guy named Stan Worth. And Stan Worth's claim to fame is he wrote Super Chicken and George of the Jungle, right? So he wrote those things. And I used to play a club with him. And I played a little flute at one time, and I played my trumpet, and I was part of this band. And he said, "Hey, man, do you think you could take up the saxophone?" So I went and bought a saxophone and got lucky. I actually, was funny. I went and I was doing a session for a band called Delaney and Bonnie back in the day. And this is where I met my friend, the saxophone player, Jerry Jumanville, who became my music mentor. And he's was famous for playing with Rod Stewart, and he was with Dr. John's band. And this guy loved the saxophone more than anything. So I got into playing saxophone, just started studying that more and more. And then finally just kind of went into saxophone, and then took up the guitar. And that's been my main doubles, was guitar and saxophone. So that's
so as we move through the arc here, some of the, Crosby, Nash, some people may have heard of, but then we'll sort of move upstream. Toto.
Yep.
How did that come about? Were you playing the same instrument, and how did you? I'm always fascinated how people move from one band to another, and it can't be like moving from one company to another, but maybe it is.
Well, it was interesting is because I was in the kid band with Jeff Beccaro and David Page, who were the founders of Toto. When we were kids, there was no Toto in those days. It was the Merciful Soul band, and I saw them take off because Jeff is, considered one of the greatest drummers that ever lived, and still to this day, he's like basically God as a drummer. Yeah. So I grew up with those guys, and they took off, and so they were my driving force. It's like, I'm gonna want to be like them. Here I was, the worst guy, so I practiced and everything. And so, for me, that was really an incredible time to get called to play with them. I had actually finished doing my Seals and Crofts, and I ended up getting in Supertramp, and that's another whole long story, from working in this bar, and the guy used to come in and see me every week and sit there. I kind of became friends with him months later, and I found out he was the drummer in Supertramp later on. They called me, and I got that gig. So you just never know where your gigs are going to come from.
Yeah.
So you just never know. It's like a bar, a guy in a bar that I've seen week after week, and I didn't even really know what he did, and it just turned into that. But, so for me, it was like Toto was, they took off, and Jeff was doing great, and then the band took off, won all these Grammys and all this stuff. So I remember getting the call from Jeff and saying, "Hey, we're going out. You want to join the band to go do this record and tour?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I want to do that." It was like a big point for me to kind of rise up and be, finally get to a point where I was good enough to play with these guys. And, kind of a funny story was I was scared to death when I took that gig, dude. I practiced like 8 hours, 10 hours a day. I was learning the music inside and out because I knew I'd have to go to rehearsal. And we were going to start playing, and I didn't want to make any mistakes because these are my brothers from when we were kids, and it meant a lot to me. It was kind of a real turning point for me to finally get accepted at that level on the music side. And I remember going into the rehearsal that day. I'm all set up, ready to go, and the first thing Jeff Beccaro did was hand me a cowbell and said, "Let's play." So we went. So I didn't have to play music. It was more about just hitting the cowbell. Well, thankfully, I became the groove is, I'm all about drum machines and metronomes. I mean, I ate, drank, slept with metronomes all my life, and owned one of the first Lynn drum machines. And so luckily, I feel I have pretty good time. I mean, because I care about it a lot. Like, it's my most important thing to me. And luckily I got the gig. Jeff was happy. We played the first tune, and people still ask me to this day, what was the best thing about playing with Toto? And I said, I got to play cowbell with Jeff Beccaro on 4 songs, because he is the groove meister, So
well, tell us. So Scott, some of the people will remember Toto, others may not. What are some of the songs? Just one or two or three.
They won 6 Grammys that one year. Rosanna, Africa. Oh God, I don't know. There's a bunch of them. Those are
2 or 3.
Georgie Porgy, you remember that one?
Yeah, Rosanna in Africa. And so Over Your Shoulder, one of those things I think are called records.
Yeah,
one is a Toto record. Do you know which one it's from? Which song?
Yeah, it's It's the Isolation record. Yeah, I think it's Isolation. Yeah, it was the Isolation record.
Okay.
That was one of the later ones, and so yeah.
All right, so let's move. So transition from Toto to Supertramp.
No, actually, I went from Supertramp to Toto.
Supertramp to Toto, and those are both, you know, obviously big bands and big names, but not potentially the biggest you played with. So how did you end up at the next one? Was that Pink Floyd after that, or how did you end up there?
You know, I played with variety. You know, through the years, I was in Mick Fleetwood's band called the Zoo, and you know, I played. You know, I played with a lot of different people and doing sessions and gigs and some tourings. I toured with Diana Ross. You know, just varieties of bands through the years. And then so we were doing an album with Supertramp, and Dave Gilmour came and played on the record as a guest, did a guest solo on the record. And so that day when he was there, we were all hanging out, and I had a gig that night just down the street from Rick Davies' house over on Ventura Boulevard, over here at a place called Josephina's. And I said, hey, I got my gig, we're going to go down and play. And I had this cool band called the Hang Dynasty, which was, you know, Lee Scalar from Phil Collins' band and Jeff Baxter from the Doobie Brothers. And, you know, it was a whole bunch of us. Just kind of was a fun band. Well, Gilmour came down, and the Supertramp guys came down and jammed and hung out that night at the gig. And then I invited Dave to come to an event that I was doing a week later. At the Guitar Center, where I kind of took over Guitar Center, I developed this whole thing called visual sound, which back in the day, the idea was making sound and picture work together. So I was created a concept of using MIDI-based tripod systems to do zooming of audio, and we filmed this whole thing in what I called visual sound.
Okay.
And you know, the whole idea is you're in the back of the room and you zoom into the guitar player, you feel the pressure, you feel what it sounds like to be with the guy, because I'd have everybody wear lavalier mics so I could zoom from this one, and then when it came in, bring that pressure, that sound presence, right? So I was really trying to make sound and picture work together. It was an area I was really interested in. So he came to this event and did the event and hung out, and then the next day I get a call to go play on the album, the Floyd record. So I went on, played on the record, put a couple solos on, did all that stuff. And then I came back, and 2 days later, I get a call, and Gilmour's calling me up saying, we're going out, and we're going to go out for a couple years, and we need somebody. You want to join the band for this whole stint? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. The funny part is I knew nothing about Pink Floyd.
Okay.
I knew nothing, dude. I mean, I knew nothing. I was into like Junior Walker and, you know, all the Stevie Wonder. I was like, because saxophone playing, you kind of hung out in the R&B world. They wouldn't say that that's a place you go for saxophone, you know, that kind of music. So where was I was going to say? Oh yeah. So I didn't know. So I called up my friends and I said, you know, I got called that I mean, when I said I didn't know much about Pink Floyd, I knew the name. And I said, I think I remember there was a song, Have a Cigar. I kind of remembered that, but that was basically all I had. And when he called me up and he says, hey, well, this first stint's going to be 2 years on the road. And I'm like, go away for 2 years? You know, that's a pretty big commitment, right? So I called my friends up and I said, you know, I got called. I went and played on this Pink Floyd record. You played on a Pink Floyd record? They said. I said, yeah. It was fun. It was cool. And then I got called by the guitar player, this guy, David Gilmour called you to play that. So my friends are all telling me this. And I said, well, they want me to join the band. They said, you got to do that. And I'm going, well, I don't really know much about it. So they all said, you know, go do this. You have to go do this. So that night I remember going to Tower Records at midnight, because it was open 24 hours, and picked up some Floyd records, came back, listened to them, and everybody was saying, you have to do this. And so I said, okay. So I told Dave yes, and boy, I'm sure glad I did. That was definitely a life-changing, you know, opportunity.
And what year do you think that was?
That was 85, 86, something like that, 85, 86. And then I stayed with the band all the way up to 92.
So you 85 up through 92, which was
that Momentary Lapse, Delicate Sound of Thunder area.
Right. So you may have been on stage. My limited Pink Floyd interactions. I grew up in Kansas City, high school and college. So I ended up at a Pink Floyd concert. Had to have been in the 80s. I believe it was Arrowhead Stadium. Knew nothing about Floyd. I listened to country and hip hop, and all I remember was a bunch of lights and a big pig flying out over the audience, and everybody just
Yeah, that was
losing their
probably,
mind when the pig came out.
oh yeah, they go crazy for that pig. I actually have videos I just found. I shot 150 hours of footage on that tour. And I've been going
Wow.
through it and kind of just digitized it. I sampled it up to 4K. I can't even believe how good it looks too. But I found pictures of me actually filming inside that pig. So I went inside it and
Oh
shot
no.
it. It's really funny.
Wow. Yeah,
Inside the pig.
that's amazing stuff. So do you consider yourself an entrepreneur or a musician or, an entrepreneur, a musician? What would the word
Well,
be?
I'm actually, I would say, yeah, I think I'm more of an entrepreneur and stuff. I had a pretty good music career, but I've really always been very interested in business. I mean, it was really funny when we were out with Floyd and stuff. Gilmore used to look over at me and I'd be reading business books, Tom Peter's In Search of Excellence. And, I was studying business. I figured I'm going to be out for 2 years. I'm going to go, figure this out. And I had already started a business called Walt Tucker, which was named after my two heroes, Walt Disney and Preston Tucker, the car manufacturer. And that was a audio video post-production house. And I had a graphics merchandising business. And we did all the, merch for Yamaha and, guitar centers and, variety of music companies. And so I had that business. And so I was really studying that more and more. Through that, I'd always been in trying to, like I said, starting up businesses, and I'm on my fourth startup. I had a couple good ones and I got smacked once, and it's like it's up, it's down. I can say, yeah, we had
The
a great
life
one.
of an
Seventh Level
entrepreneur.
was a great ride. Was able to take that one public. We were a NASDAQ company and had a wonderful ride on that, and that's a whole nother thing. And that's what really got me into technology, because we were a tech company, and so we had to build all our own engines. And
Yeah.
we actually built this engine called Top Gun that ran on top of Windows that allowed for multimedia. So it was really the very first engines that could really produce multimedia at a high quality on a 386 25 megahertz machine. And Bill Gates used to hold up Toonland at all of his conferences and show clips of us and say, see, Windows is a good multimedia machine.
Yeah, that's amazing.
At a time when we, like you remember, it was a 386 25 meg with a 4 mega RAM. That was the base unit. And 2.5 meg of that RAM was used on Windows. So you had 1.5 meg to figure out how to
you'll
get
never need
animation
more than a
working.
gig of memory, and how wrong, whoever they are, how wrong they were.
Oh my God, I know,
Yeah.
it's crazy. When I look back at this stuff and thinking about, 28.8 modems and, all that stuff. And our buddy Ken Rakowski, I'll never forget, he called me up one night and said, dude, you got to check this out. And he went on and I did my first instant message with him on ICQ.
Yeah.
And my mouth dropped, man. When I saw instant message go, I was like, holy crap.
Those days of metal, Scott, when you and I and Richard, bangs like that was an amazing time. I hope somebody eventually does a documentary on those few years when so many of us were together and have splintered off. I think it would be fascinating.
I mean, it's crazy when you look at the group of people there and where everybody had gone. I mean, that group is so impressive. I mean, listen, the whole Bitcoin world's coming out of that group in a sense, right?
Yeah,
the
I mean, a
people that
lot
held that
of
whole
us,
thing
Brock
up.
and Michael Turpin and Steve
Turpin
Beauregard and on and on.
Quigley,
Quigley,
all
yeah.
those guys, right? So
Yeah,
it's
Malcolm, who unfortunately died, Malcolm Casal.
yeah.
Yeah. So before we transition to some of the technology stuff, which
Sure.
I will get to, as an entrepreneur, looking back, probably in the Floyd years, because I think you were old enough to more appreciate things. It was a longer run. What was the most surprising part of being in a band of that stature and on the road? And, like looking back, what do you think was most surprising or enlightening that you didn't realize at the time?
I would have to say the power of the brand. That brand is so powerful worldwide. We used to kind of laugh because we'd have our tour pass, right? And we called it the key to the universe because it didn't matter where you go. I mean, you could go to some restaurant and somebody'd say, oh, I'm sorry, sir, we're full. We're sold out right now. And you go like this. I said, right this way, sir.
Yeah.
It was like a direct door. But yeah, the power of that brand and the fans for that band, I mean, just crazy, right? Just amazing all over the world. We would have people that would, I'd be in the south of France and I come out my hotel room and there's a bunch of guys with records. I'd see those guys. The next thing I'm in Japan and those same guys are standing outside the hotel room. I'm in Germany. The same guys are standing out. They would just take the entire, 6-9 months and just follow the band all over the world and stuff. So the power of that brand, I think, was just really, remarkable. And, for me personally, as a music level, Dave Gilmour really is my music guru. I mean, I learned so much from him. He's such a master of melody, right? So he taught me how to say, stop trying to play all those notes, play something people can understand and listen and can grasp onto. Because I mean, you just think about it, if you take Comfortably Numb, the song, if you leave out that guitar solo in the middle, that middle guitar solo, it's like somebody left the verse out of the song, right? Because people get so used to that lick and that whole thing. But so from a melody point of view, so from a music point of view, it was all this it's not what you play, it's what you say. I learned that from Dave and really changed my style to be more melodic and more what I'd say musical in the sense, and less gymnastics and more of that.
Interesting.
And then on a business side, those guys, I mean, dude, that was one of the most impressive things that I'd ever seen moving around. There was like 150, 60 people moving around with, 30, 40 semi trucks carrying this massive thing, and just the logistics. And, as a producer myself and working on business, it was just fascinating for me to see this machine work. So I learned a lot from that too.
Yeah, and that to me is fascinating with what it takes behind the scenes. But I mean, I grew up in construction, so I don't want to spend much time in there because I walk by construction sites and the smell still bothers me. So on the front end, you said, Scott, 3 things that I think are interesting that'll move us forward: the power of the brand, the power of the fan, and the power of the message.
Absolutely. That's the whole game, right?
Yeah, and so that translates as well, I think, into business. How do you create your brand, and what's the message people remember? What are those emotional sound bites?
Yeah, absolutely. My whole thing too is, I've been really up in the startup, really trying to understand. I actually was teaching a course over at USC called SPACE, which stands for Story, Plan, Army, Conversion, Education, right? Yeah. Everything's about the story, right? And that's the big part of the brand. And it's not the story, like I try to tell artists, it's not your story. Hey, I came from Cincinnati, I played guitar, I was in, nobody cares about that story. I'm just like, what do you stand for? What's your purpose? And what problem are you solving, right?
Yeah.
And so it's about, getting that brand and really understanding what it is you're doing so that you can build it around that. And then it's all the messaging, because that's that story part, because everything falls from that. Because once you have the story in place, then the rest of your business goes. And then, from story, we go to plan. And that's where I'm a big fan of the lean startup principles. The whole idea of the lean canvas. I use that still to this day if I do any consulting, and, the 1-page business plan, the 9 questions you have to answer. And, and then the premises of, lean startup, is, don't run out of resources, fail fast, figure out so you can pivot, test and validate everything. And so I use a lot of those principles. And, one thing that's great about that 1-page business plan is it doesn't just tell you what you're going to do, it tells you what you're not going to do.
Yeah.
And if anything I've learned is that's the big one, because it's so easy. And I'm the poster child of building something, because one of my companies, I raised all the money, went and built this thing. It was massive. And it was like, I thought it was incredible, but nobody cared.
Yeah.
Nobody cared, right? It's just, I cared, and a handful of people cared, but I didn't do my testing and validating before I went and did all that. So,
yeah. And I was lightly involved with one of I'll call it a startup that you created that failed, that, in retrospect, I still don't know why, but it was a brilliant idea, which, do you know what I'm talking about?
New Media Broadcasting, so Mashcast.
Nope.
Oh.
I won't even make you guess, because I want to make sure we get your new stuff in. The Indie Entertainment Summit.
Oh yeah, that was
like a South by Southwest for LA. I mean, LA's the creative capital of the world, and you pulled a first one off that was just amazing. And I just,
well, what happened with that was, unfortunately, the partner I had, I caught him with his pen in the freaking till, and he took all the money, and I found out all this stuff, and so I just couldn't deal with him anymore. So, and it was his thing. I mean, his brand and his deal that I came in to partner up with him to go build. Still, it was a great idea, but.
Yeah, the Indie Entertainment Summit. But again, being an entrepreneur, it's important to pick your team and have good people around you. And I remember, you telling me the story of that's sort of why it failed. But that brand and the execution and the people, I'm still friends with Adam Gaynor from Matchbox 20 and some of those guys, so it was great.
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, it those things, they almost kill you. They're not that easy to do, right? You think it's easy to have a conference because we had, was it 4 days? And I think we had like 80 panels.
Yeah.
I mean, it was crazy. And those bands playing all over Los Angeles. But yeah, you win some. And, all of them, I never look at it at, failing is one thing. You can look at it that way, but I'm always looking for the upside of down. And there's a lot of things you can learn from these things. I've had some that have been incredible wins, and then I've gotten pounded some of the times, but they've all been valuable lessons for sure.
Well, let's talk about the most recent win. And by recent, I mean 2 weeks ago. I see you popping up in my world a little bit of a $1 million plus NFT.
Yep.
Well, I still don't know what you sold, Scott, but I thought rather than me trying to figure it out, I wanted to hear it straight from you. So talk to us about the movement into NFT, or what you're doing and what you sold.
Sure.
And you have another one coming out.
Yeah. So here's the deal. I can honestly say I've been through the period of time when, CD-ROM happened. That was a big deal, computers and becoming entertainment devices. And then moving through internet, when the internet took off and it was internet world and all those periods of time. For me, the biggest one of them all is this NFT thing for artists, because I believe this is the holy grail for artists. I look at NFTs as publishing, fan engagement, the ability to program them. I'm like just blown away with what this means for the independent artist.
The NFTs eventually are going to be programmable. They're technically smart contracts. You'll be able to write in rule sets to, if I share my song with you, you have to register to my fan club, and you get it. Like it's programmable digital assets where the smart contracts will really make it fascinating.
Well, yeah, and then you can start thinking of things. And again, Josh Law, Josh, right? Yeah, he's our attorney and stuff. He was talking the other day, and the idea of, you have a child and you create an NFT that on their 13th birthday something happens, right? So you can get into really unique kind of experiences and stuff. So yeah, we did. So I saw this. Everybody was coming after me for my NFTs because of all my Pink Floyd stuff. I've been an avid collector. I mean, I had 2 storage bins filled with. I have so much stuff. So I started seeing this, and being around the crypto world, some, with all the guys and what we've known, and kind of following it and playing and dabbling in that space. I wish I would have listened to Turpin more back in the day when he came into metal that day and said, "Hey, we should buy this." I think it was $7 or something.
Yeah.
Some stupid number. But anyway, I've been following it. And then I remember seeing the first Crypto Kitties piece and the Crypto Punks, that whole part of time when it first started happening. And kind of was following it, but didn't really totally grasp it. And then when I started seeing all these other things starting to happen, I started looking in, and people were calling me. So I started looking and talking to companies, and I just realized, first of all, the deals were not that great for me. The way they wanted the splits, and the fact that I have a lot of people in IP and stuff that I could bring to the party, and I just couldn't find the right partner. So I basically said, you know what, I'm a business guy. I'm going to go figure this out myself. So I hooked up with a blockchain guy, a friend, and we were going to go kind of build this thing. And then I hooked up with a guy named Jared Fink at a company called Cosmic Wire. And Cosmic has really been sort of like almost like a label, a new kind of a label. But one of the things they have is they built this incredible marketing engine, like this crazy tool set for marketing. And he'd been running campaigns for Universal and Warner's and all these things. And I said, well, that's the game, is it's one thing to have these things, but how do I market them? How do I make sure I put it in front of the people that will want it and buy it, right? So we connected up, and so I was going to do my NFTs with him, and then we just started, we hit it off. And so I've been bringing in all kinds of IP, and one of the things that we brought in was the one that we just did, which was our first launch. We have about a half a dozen of them lining up now, and we have our next auction on the same project. This was for Ruby Mazer, who is the guy that did the original Rolling Stones Lips that was on the Tumbling Dice record, which then became, that logo came from that. Then that was been the Rolling Stones, one of the top icons in the world. Well, Ruby did the very first thing, and Mick went off and they kind of designed their own thing. But these were the original Lips. And he did 12 new paintings to celebrate the 50 years of this particular icon. And it's considered one of the top icons and top 10 in the world. McDonald's, Nike, and those Lips, everybody knows that's Rolling Stones. There's no question. Nobody's confused. So we saw Ruby and connected up with him. And so we connected. He did the 12 drawings, and then we did 12 animated NFTs of each of those drawings. And so our art auction was a combination, was a hybrid model. So it was the actual physical asset of the painting along with the digital piece at the same time, sold together as one. And so we were over in Hawaii and for the opening and the auction, the very beginning of the auction. And we got somebody to buy one for $1.1 million, which was incredible.
Any idea what, when you started the process, was it, you know, did you think it was going to go for, because it's still a unique piece of art. So what did you think it was going to go for, and how much of the NFT do you think added anything to it? You're still buying the original art and the digital attachment.
Yeah, well, here's what was interesting. You remember, we're data guys, so we're fine looking at all the data. What we found is actually the person that bought this is not a crypto person. This is a art collector person that wanted to get into NFTs and seeing it, because there's a whole community of people.
Yeah, they're trying to figure it out.
They're trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
So when he saw the combination of the actual painting and the hybrid, that was the selling point. And happened to be a big Rolling Stones fan and loved the idea of having this, and actually had picked up one of Ruby's other paintings of some of the stuff that he had, so was familiar with that. And they came in and they bought it. And what was so fascinating is while we were there with Ruby and we walked in, and there's a video online. I don't know if you saw the video. He when we told him we just sold this thing for 1.1 million, he he couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
But then he launched into his story, which we didn't know about. It was like 1 year ago, almost to the date, he was diagnosed with cancer and was going to die in 6 months. They gave him 6 months to live. And so his whole thing was he wanted to do this one last auction to kind of, you know, the swan song. Well, he got into, his daughter, who's a pretty famous actress. She's on a show called All American now. Her name is Monet Mazer. Called him up. He called her and told her, you know, I'm sorry about this. I'm putting my dogs are going, getting my stuff settled. She says, no way, Dad. Flew there. And she started getting on the computer, and she found some acupuncturists or people that were about all this kind of Chinese men, but were like leaders in this field. Okay. Went to them, talked him into it, and he went there 4 days a week. He was getting acupuncture. They made him go meditate every day on the beach, and they put him through a regimen and food. And then 6 months later, it went away, right? And so his story is so compelling because he wanted to, I didn't realize, because part of the proceeds of this is going to cancer research. And we didn't realize, I thought it was just something, I didn't know he was stricken by it, right?
Yeah.
So we just said, wow, I said, that's amazing. So what we did is we auctioned that one off, and now we're doing the rest of them now, which is on next, is it Thursday? I guess it's Thursday. Yes, Thursday. Because we're doing a big clubhouse with one of the major NFT groups on Wednesday, but the auction is going to go down on Thursday for these 11 or 12 other pieces that he put together and that we did.
Wow. So
that's that project. And so we did that, and we're working on Eddie Van Halen's Ferrari. That's another one right now. And we've got, and the big one we're doing right at this moment, our very next one is Leland Scalar, who's the bass player that most people know from Phil Collins. He's got the big beard. He's very recognizable. He's actually the most recorded bass player in history. He's on 26,000 records and over 2,200 albums through his career. And he's just an amazing a guy. And what he did was, when he was out on the road, he basically went up to one of his the guys it was the last day on the Phil Collins tour. He went up to the sound guy and he said, hey, Jimmy, or whatever the guy's name was. He says, hey, let me take your picture, right? And the guy turned up and he flipped him off, right? And he took the picture. And so now he went around, he got everybody to flip him off in the Phil Collins band. Well, that turned into 15 years of over 12,000 people he has completely done.
That's funny.
So we've actually put together we're doing a whole set of trading cards.
Okay.
And I'm talking about, he's got everybody from Yo-Yo Ma to Eddie Van Halen to Jack Nicholson to Lawrence Fishburne to George Lucas to, I mean, it goes on and on. The list is just massive. So we built a set of NFT, we're doing a set of NFT trading cards. So we've got the commons, the rares, the ultra rares, and that's all tied into it. And it's all tied into this, we're doing fuck cancer, basically, that idea, right? And so it's all tied into Ruby. And we've actually, he just painted a picture of Scalar, which is going to be a Ruby, which will be in the packs. And if you get the Ruby, then you're going to be able to come to this big event that we've got coming on, a big all-star event we're coming on for this giant cancer drive. So we're going to be following that all the way through with a handful of our NFTs that we've got coming out here, pretty much.
All right. So in wrapping up, I have a question that has 3 parts, but simple.
Oh, simple answer. Okay.
Because I want to be able to bring you back. So question 1, what did you mint the NFT on?
It's Ethereum.
So you did an Ethereum NFT. Great.
Yeah.
2, how did you do the marketing?
Well, we used, again, remember, that was the beautiful part of this Cosmic, right? They have this most powerful marketing thing. And I'm coming out of growth hacking and understanding content marketing. Their system they put together is really incredible. So it was really about identifying, finding the audience, and then putting the offer in front of the audience.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And then 3rd, how do we find you for the next upcoming one? And then I want to do a follow-up afterwards, but how do we find you for the next NFT, or just keep track of you in general?
Well, you can keep track of me in general, but if you want to look at the Ruby Mazer, it's rubymazernft.com. And you can go look at the ones that are up there, which are going on auction next week. So
perfect. We'll try and get this out. I want to track the progress, Scott. When I saw you with $1 million NFT, I thought, we've got to catch up. This is amazing.
Ooh, I couldn't believe it, man. That was like so cool.
Yeah.
That was like amazing, because we worked hard for the last kind of 3 months. And what happened is this, real quick, this Ruby deal came out because one of the other platforms screwed up, and then he was like fed up, and then we got connected through somebody. He says, hey dude, we've got about 2.5 weeks. Do you think you can do it? So we did the whole thing in 2.5 weeks and made it all happen. So it was pretty good. It was definitely a sprint.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, buddy. Well, Scott Page, appreciate it as always. I mean, I love the conversation because I get to learn more, and I always want to keep learning from you because the entrepreneur, musician, creative side. So keep me in mind.
Oh, I will, dude. I'm a fan of yours too, brother, because I've seen all the stuff you've done through the years, and I'm going to pick your brain on the blockchain, and I'd love to talk to you more about what we're doing.
We'll have to do that, and let me know how I can help on the marketing stuff. I mean, my database and people I could send it out to is pretty extensive. So, I'm going to come talk to you. I'm ready. I'm ready. Fortunately for us, Scott, we can do it in person. So if we're both in LA, let's do it.
Let's go, man. Let's have a lunch or something here coming up.
Perfect.
Maybe next week.
All right, man. Scott Page, Pink Floyd, Toto. I loved it earlier before we started. I said, what's behind you? And he said, 3 Floyds and a Toto. All right, Scott, thanks so much. We'll catch up soon. Stephen Meade, the BullsEye guy. Tune in next week.